Hi, my name's Alan Gibbons. I'm a writer sitting here in my kitchen in Liverpool, and my story begins with a book called Shadow of the Minotaur. There it is, Shadow of the Minotaur. And it all goes back to, I don't know, well, I was teaching, I was a primary school teacher, and there I was in my classroom, just minding my own business, talking to my year three kids when I had running feet. And you think, all right, I'm a teacher. I'm not going to let people run down corridors. We can't have that. So I dashed to the door to tell off the kid that would be rushing down the corridor. And there's the school secretary, Mrs. Crawley. So I said, Mrs. Crawley, what are you doing? And she goes, Alan, you're going to be on Blue Peter. And I thought, cool. I used to watch Blue Peter when I was a kid, knew the tunes, seen all the stuff. And I said, what's it all in aid of? And she says, come to the office. And in the office, he had the phone call of the BBC, and I phoned them up, and I was shortlisted for the Blue Peter Book of the Year. Go me. So I'm thinking, great stuff. And I said, who's the shortlist? It's a bit like if you go in the Champions League, you know, if you're up against Accrington Stanley, Crewe Alexandra, and Real FC, you might stand a chance. If you're up against Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Bayern Munich, you're thinking, oh, heck. So I said, who's the first one? They said, David Almond. And I thought, oh, no. David Almond wrote a book called Skellig that sold over 1 million copies. He was on a film on Sky One, so you're thinking, crumbs, I'm not going to beat him. I said, who's the next one? They said, Michael Morpurgo. I said, you were kidding. Warhorse, Private Peaceful, Butterfly Lion. The man's a living legend. I said, who's the next one? They said, Jacqueline Wilson. I thought, you were kidding. One of the 2 top female writers for kids in the universe. Oh, it can't get worse. Who's the next one? And they said, J.K. Rowling. And I thought, it just got worse. I've got to do something that Voldemort's never done. I've got to beat Harry Potter. So that's it. I'm going to be going down to London to compete with all these famous writers. So I go down to London and I get to the Blue Peter studios, and the lady says, oh, hello, Mr. Gibbons, come this way. And the first crazy thing is you have to go into the green room, as in that picture behind me. So I go in the green room and you get your makeup on. I don't mean lipstick and mascara. So I got me makeup on and I go into the studios and I'm sitting next to somebody who inspired me to be a writer, a guy called Roger McGough. And he was a poet and a singer and an entertainer back in the 1960s at the time of the Beatles. And they had a hit record, him and his mates. We'll drink a drink to Lily the Pink, the Pink, the Pink. And I know it's not exactly Mr. Boombastic or Eminem, but I'm sitting next to him going, I am not worthy, I am not worthy. And I'm thinking, what next? And then Connie Hook, the presenter, comes on stage and she's got the golden envelope. The winner of the Blue Peter Book Award, the year 2000, is... I go for a cup of tea. I pop to the Asda. I go to New York on holiday. The winner is... And I'm thinking, come on. I took a little sip of water and she said, the winner is Alan Gibbons, Shadow of the Minotaur. And I turned around, looked at Roger and went, and sprayed water on his glasses. So I walked up the front and she says, you've won. And I said, cool. She said, would you like to say anything to the public? And I said, I don't think so, you know. I sounded like Wallace and Gromit. Jeez, I didn't know what to say. So that's how it began. And the book, Shadow of the Minotaur, in the next week sold all 5,000 copies that were printed. So they printed it again. And they sold out. And they printed it again. And they sold out. And this just kept happening. So now I think it's 80, 90,000 copies. I did once sign a film deal on it, but it never happened. So good things happened. And that got me started as a writer. I mean, I'd written loads of books before that. None of them had been very successful. And this one was. So you think, okay, I'm a writer. And in the next few years, I moved on from teaching to become a full-time writer. So where does it all begin? It begins with family. My family came over in the old days from County Wexford in Ireland, and they settled in the most gorgeous, stunning town ever, Crewe. And that's where I grew up. So once upon a time, I was a baby, a dead cute baby. And the first thing that happens when you're a little baby, if you're lucky, your mum and dad tell you, well, more your mum tells you stories, not your dad. Your dad comes home and sort of falls asleep and dribbles on the couch. But your mum starts to tell you stories. So I got Little Red Riding Hood, and you kind of think, these are crazy stories, you know. Little Red is about 6. She walks through the woods on her own. She meets a big hairy dude. Ooh, you know, the big hairy dude eats grandma. I mean, that's a bit out of order, isn't it? And then the dad comes round and chops the stomach open. Granny falls out. This is a seriously weird story. And we read it to kids. Think of Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel. Mum and dad leave the kids in the woods to die. I mean, has that ever happened to you? You go to McDonald's and your mum and dad drive off. Bye! Ain't going to happen, you know? And then this old age pensioner wants to fatten the kids up to eat them. Are you kidding? These are stories we read to little children. Well, I loved all these stories because they're kind of scary and a bit weird. And then it was books. I can even remember the first book that I ever kind of got. And I don't know if any of you have got one of these mums that's fussy. I've got a fussy mum. She's 90 now. But one day she decided I was turning invisible. I was too pale. So she takes me to the hospital. And I was 4. And at the hospital, they had a little table and they had some books on it. And so I kind of was beginning to read, and I picked up the Donald Duck Annual, 1957. And I started to read through it, and I'm laughing my socks off. I think it's the funniest thing I have ever seen. There's one bit where Donald Duck is balancing on a round Edam cheese, and I thought this was hysterical. And then the nurse come across and said, "You're enjoying that, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Do you want to keep it?" "Can I?" "You can." And that was the first book I ever owned. And after that, it was anything I could get my hands on. Used to go with my mum into Northwich, which was near where I was growing up, and we'd go to the library and I'd pick up books. So you could have 3. Now you can get, I think, 16. And I'd take these 3 books home and I'd read them. And then it was Treasure Island, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And the other thing that really inspired me was comics. I mean, first of all, we had things like the Beano and the Dandy. And then I kind of moved on to things like the Victor and the Hotspur, which were all about the war and stuff like that. They were adventure stories. And then one day, when I was approaching my teens, I go into the newsagents to get the Victor, and I saw these really colourful, amazing looking comics. And I leaned forward, and there was Spider-Man. And these were Marvel comics. And then every bit of pocket money I had was Spider-Man, Thor the Thunder God, the Avengers, the X-Men, my personal favourite, Black Panther. Absolutely loved the Black Panther, including where he had a fight with Captain America and won. And that was it. I really started to read and read and read. And then there was something else that made me a writer. Being a writer is about words. And so it's oral stories that you hear from people in your family. It's jokes and it's song. One of the things you grow up with is songs. And I can still remember I was sitting with my mother, and we had what was called then the wireless. You didn't really call it the radio then. And on the wireless came this song, Love Me Do, by the Beatles. And I was 9. And my mother made about the only correct prediction she's ever made in her life. She says, "Alan, they're going to go far, these lads." So I thought, I'll keep an eye on these guys. And of course, they swept the world. And then I went round my mate's house. And I loved this song by the Beatles called Stop, Wait a Minute, Mr. Postman. And I went round my mate's house and he was playing Stop, Wait a Minute, Mr. Postman, but not by the Beatles. The people who did it first were a group of 4 women called the Marvelettes. And of course, as a kid, you get curious. Who makes this wonderful sound? So I went and got a magazine called Fab. We had two magazines in the 60s called Fab and Gear. And in Fab, I found a picture of the Marvelettes, proud African American women from Detroit, Michigan. And I thought, cool. And that was it. From then on, there was one thing that had always been there in my whole life. Anybody who can make a sound like that, fantastic. And because they were African American, it just told me, you know, the idea of racism, stupid. And that was it. Hooked for life on the stories of America and the stories of fighting slavery and all this stuff. And I read a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin about the evils of slavery, and I was hooked. And another of the books that really got me was The Mersey Sound. At that time, it was all the Beatles and Jerry and the Pacemakers, and three poets called Roger McGough, Brian Patton, and Adrian Henry created this wonderful book of poetry. And that was it, songs and poems, Dusty Springfield, Sam Cooke. And it hooked me onto kind of the history of America. And America's always been this sort of big inspiration. And so I think it's like becoming a writer, it's almost like having a bath. You have a bath in all these wonderful inspirations and things that grab you and make you want to write. And then the other funny thing, it's people who can speak well. And there was this guy, this boxer called Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. And this guy, he wouldn't take rubbish off anybody. And he was another fantastic inspiration. So as I grew up, I suppose I was a bit of a geeky, nerdy kid, but I liked me football, I liked climbing trees, did the odd little bit of boxing and maybe got punched in the face too hard. And as I went along, you know, you kind of have to learn to fight if you got a name like Gibbons, because you're named after a monkey. And that was it. I'm growing up and all these ideas bubbling away in my head. Never dreamed I'd be a writer, not in a million years. And then you don't notice, but life kind of happens to you. And by the time I was a teenager, some of the teachers started to say, well, you're fairly bright, you're doing okay in your studies. Why don't you think about university? And I don't think I did think about it much, but I ended up passing the exams and then off I went to university. And I arrived at Warwick University and I read even more books. And then a weird kind of thing happens with some people that you don't know what to do next. I mean, some people know what they want to do with their life. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't know what to do with my life. Ooh. And I didn't want to go on and study and become a professor or something. And I thought, I don't really want to be a teacher. And I didn't know what to do about, you know, a job. So I worked in a toilet factory. And I can still remember the lads, you know, someone reading the Daily Mirror and someone reading the Daily Mail. And I was reading a French novel called Le Désert de l'Amour. And eventually, other things started to come in. And, you know, the rock and roll, I was going to the concerts and kind of messing about. And I'm still not sure what to do in my life. But I sort of went and became a secondary teacher eventually, and I didn't like it. So then I went and had a go at being a journalist, and that was okay. But they sent me to Northern Ireland, and there were plastic bullets and all sorts of stuff going on. I thought, a bit dangerous. And I did a few other jobs, and then I met my wife, and we had a few kids. And I'm kind of thinking, right, got to teach them to read. So we started to kind of teach the kids to read. And I started to read these fantastic picture books, you know, Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, you know, and We're Going on a Bear Hunt by Michael Rosen. And the picture books, I think eventually I was shoving the kids away. Get off my book, you. You know, the kids are trying to listen to the story. And I'm going, it's for me, this, you know. And that was it. I thought, I wonder if I could do them. And so one day I sat down at my sister-in-law's typewriter, and she'd got this German typewriter she'd given to us called an Adler, which means eagle. And I'm tapping out, trying to write these stories, and it didn't have a letter E. the letter E had broken. Do you know how many E's there are in the English language? So I had to write them all in on the manuscript with a pen. And I sent off my manuscript to 25 different publishers. And then you start to get rejection slips. Sorry, we don't want you. Oh, sorry, we don't want you. Oh, sorry, we don't want you. Oh. And when you're feeling really dejected, through the letterbox came 3 letters in 2 days. And these 3 letters all said, if you do a little bit of redrafting, we might just publish you. And one of these 3 publishers, they said, if you do the redrafts, we'll give you £625. And I thought, I can make money out of being a writer. How cool is this? So I sent off me changed manuscript, and what became Orion, the publisher, they said, okay, we're going to publish you. And that was my first book. And my first book was called Pig. And Pig was about a pig. And it's something that happened to me when I was a kid. I saw a runaway pig, and this policeman was chasing the pig and caught it. And I thought it was extremely funny. So I made that my first book. And since then, I've written loads and loads and loads of books. That's my most famous book, Shadow of the Minotaur. And it's about fantasy, and it's about adventure, and it's about kind of warfare and monsters. It's the sort of stuff I would have loved as a kid. And this is kind of a fantasy that I did set in India. And so I write big fantasy like Lord of the Rings, but set in India with saris and war elephants. And then I kind of write family stories. This one is actually about my wife's mum and kind of her life as a child at the time of the Second World War. And so I wrote a story called Street Corner Dad, which kind of fictionalizes her story. And I write football stories. Now, this one is one of my stories. And this is kind of, I'm not sure what it is. I think it's like the Swedish edition of one of my football stories. So your books go all over the world. But what I mostly write is thrillers like this. This is a thriller about kind of gangsters in Northern Ireland. And this is a thriller about a strange figure following you in the woods. And I kind of like elements of mystery and adventure. And there's always a fight in my books. A poet called Michael Rosen said, you can always tell one of Alan's books because there's always a punch up half the way through. And that's true, even in the love stories. And so I write everything that I can get my hands on, poetry and non-fiction. So this is a book I wrote for teachers about how to teach kids to write about non-fiction. And altogether now, I think I've written about 70 odd books for 5 or 6 different publishers. And I don't write as much as I used to, because when you've written 70 odd books, you kind of pick and choose what to write next. It's a bit more relaxed than when you start out and you're thinking, got to get somebody to read me, got to get somebody to read me. And over the years, it has meant all sorts of cool things, like I've been to about 70 countries. So somebody in a school in China thinks, oh, I like this book. They invite you over, they put you on their aeroplane, they pay for that. They give you a meal, you pay for that. They put you in a nice hotel, pay for that. And while you're there, you can go and see the Great Wall of China. So when I was in Africa, I went off on a kind of safari, and just writing has been really good to me. It's done a few things. It's took me all over the world. It's given me an excuse to talk about myself to loads and loads of people. And I suppose it's made it so I could go into other worlds of my own imagining. And all of that is just incredibly nice. And so that is basically my story as a writer. It started off with me being wrapped up in stories as a kid. It continued with me, at school and university, becoming passionate about reading, because reading is like a ladder. You stand on top and you can see a heck of a long way. And then it became my living. So I earned enough to be able to buy my house and bring up my kids. And so writing's been good for me. So make sure you read and you write, and you never know, it might be good for you. Thanks for listening.